On my first day working at Seattle General Hospital, everyone gave me the same warning. Stay away from Dr. Mason Carter. He never smiles. Not at patients. Not at nurses. Not at anyone. I believed them. Until he walked past me, stopped, looked straight into my eyes, and smiled. The entire hallway went silent. Nurses dropped what they were holding. Even the head surgeon stared at us in shock. I had never met this man before. So why was the hospital's coldest doctor smiling only at me? The answer would uncover a secret he'd been hiding for years and change both of our lives forever. Oliver Brooks had imagined his first day at Seattle General Hospital 100 different ways. In none of those daydreams did he expect complete strangers to warn him about the same person. "Whatever you do," the receptionist whispered while handing him his employee badge, "don't take it personally if Dr. Mason Carter ignores you." Oliver looked up from the badge. "Ignores me?" She laughed nervously. "He ignores everyone." A nearby nurse overheard the conversation and shook her head. "Ignore?" she said. "That's the nice version. The man barely smiles. I've worked here for 6 years and I've seen him smile exactly once." Another nurse walked past carrying patient charts. "You're talking about Dr. Carter again?" she asked. The first nurse nodded. The newcomer looked at Oliver with sympathy. "Good luck. He's the best trauma surgeon in the hospital, but he's impossible to read." Oliver forced a smile. "Sounds like I'll stay out of his way." Smart decision. That was the third warning he'd received before 9 in the morning. Oliver couldn't understand why everyone seemed fascinated by one doctor. He had accepted the administrative coordinator position because he wanted a fresh start after graduating from college. Hospitals were busy, meaningful places where every day mattered. He liked helping people even if he wasn't the one wearing a white coat. The hospital itself was beautiful. Large glass windows filled the hallways with natural light. Nurses moved quickly between departments. Doctors discussed cases while families waited hopefully outside patient rooms. Everything felt alive. Everything felt important. Oliver adjusted his navy blue ID badge and reminded himself to stay calm. Wearing dark blue scrubs beneath a white lab coat. His name badge read, Dr. Mason Carter. Trauma surgery. He looked to be around 29. Dark brown hair. Calm blue eyes. Confident posture. There was nothing dramatic about the way he carried himself. Yet the hallway somehow became quieter the moment he appeared. Conversations paused. Staff members respectfully stepped aside. Not because they were afraid. Because they admired him. Linda leaned closer. "That's him." Oliver nodded. "So that's Dr. Carter." Mason reviewed a patient chart while walking toward them. He didn't seem to notice anyone around him. Just like everyone had described, Oliver expected him to walk straight past. Instead, about 10 feet away, Mason stopped. He slowly looked up from the chart. His eyes met Oliver's. For a brief second, neither of them moved. Oliver felt strangely frozen. There was something familiar about those blue eyes. Not familiar enough to recognize. Just enough to make him wonder. Then something impossible happened. The corners of Mason's mouth lifted into a gentle, genuine smile. It wasn't a polite smile. It wasn't forced. It looked warm. Almost relieved. "Welcome to Seattle General, Oliver," Mason said quietly. "I hope you like it here." Oliver stared in surprise. Thank you, doctor. It suits you already." Before Oliver could ask what that meant, Mason gave a small nod and continued down the hallway. Silence followed him. Real silence. Oliver noticed every nurse, technician, and physician staring at him. One nurse nearly dropped the clipboard she was holding. Another whispered so loudly that everyone nearby heard it. Did Dr. Carter just smile? I've never seen that." Was he actually smiling? Linda looked just as shocked as everyone else. "I don't believe it." Oliver frowned. "What happened?" She turned toward him slowly. "You don't understand." "I guess I don't. I've worked with Dr. Carter for almost 8 years." She paused. "I have never seen him smile at someone he just met." Oliver looked back toward the end of the hallway where Mason had disappeared. There has to be another explanation. Maybe, but I can't think of one. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Oliver organized schedules, answered emails, and learned how the trauma department handled emergencies. Yet no matter what he was doing, people kept finding excuses to stop by his desk. So, you know Dr. Carter? Oliver shook his head.
No.
Are you related?
No.
Went to school together?
No.
Then why did he smile at you? I honestly have no idea. By the end of the day, Oliver had repeated that sentence at least 20 times. When his shift finally ended, he packed his bag and walked toward the employee parking garage. The evening air felt cool after spending all day inside the hospital. He reached his car and unlocked it. Just as he opened the driver's door, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned around. Dr. Mason Carter stood several feet away, still wearing his white coat after what had obviously been a very long day. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Mason looked at Oliver with the same gentle expression from earlier. I'm glad you're here, he said softly. I think this hospital has been waiting for someone like you. Before Oliver could respond, Mason quietly walked away, leaving Oliver standing beside his car with one question echoing through his mind. Why did the hospital's most reserved doctor act as if they'd known each other for years, when Oliver was certain they had never met? Oliver barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same moment replaying in his mind. Dr. Mason Carter looking up from his patient chart. That unexpected smile. Those quiet words. I'm glad you're here. None of it made sense. He had lived in Seattle for only 3 months. Before that, he had grown up in Portland and finished college in Oregon. As far as he knew, he had never met Mason Carter. So why did the doctor look at him as if he were someone important? By the time Oliver arrived at Seattle General the next morning, he had convinced himself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe Mason confused him with someone else. Maybe he smiled at everyone occasionally, and the staff had exaggerated his reputation. That had to be it. It was the only explanation that made sense. Morning, Oliver. He looked up to see Linda carrying 2 coffees. You look tired. I kept thinking about yesterday. She laughed. So did the entire trauma department. Oliver raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Linda handed him one of the coffees. I've had 4 different nurses ask me if you and Dr. Carter are secretly related. Oliver nearly choked on his drink. We're not. I know that. Then why is everyone acting like it's such a big deal? Linda leaned against the reception desk. Because something changed yesterday. What changed? She smiled. For the first time in years, people saw a different side of him. Before Oliver could answer, an emergency alert echoed through the hospital. Trauma team to emergency bay 1. Within seconds, the calm hallway transformed into controlled chaos. Doctors hurried toward the emergency department. Nurses prepared equipment. Paramedics pushed a stretcher through the automatic doors. Oliver instinctively stepped aside, watching everyone move with incredible precision. Then he saw Mason. His expression was completely focused. Every instruction he gave was calm and confident. Blood pressure. 110/70. CT is ready. Good. Let's move. There was no panic in his voice.
No hesitation.
Only quiet leadership. Oliver watched from a distance, fascinated. The man everyone described as cold wasn't cold at all. He was simply completely devoted to his patients. Nearly an hour later, the emergency had settled. The patient was stable. The hallway slowly returned to normal. Oliver was organizing appointment requests when he noticed someone standing beside his desk. He looked up. Mason. Good morning, Oliver. Oliver smiled politely. Good morning, doctor. I heard orientation went well. It did.
I'm glad.
There was an awkward pause. Oliver decided to ask the question that had been bothering him since yesterday. Can I ask you something? Of course. Have we met before? For the first time, Mason hesitated. Only for a second. Then he answered.
No.
The reply was calm. Too calm. Oliver couldn't explain why, but something about it felt incomplete. Then, Mason tilted his head slightly. Then, I guess everyone was surprised yesterday. I noticed. They say you never smile. A faint smile appeared again. So I've heard. Oliver laughed. You're proving them wrong. Perhaps. Before Oliver could continue, Mason's pager vibrated. He glanced down. Duty calls. He started walking away before stopping again. Have you eaten lunch yet? Oliver blinked. Not yet. Don't wait too long. Then he disappeared around the corner. Oliver stared after him. That conversation had lasted less than 2 minutes. Yet somehow it left him even more confused. By lunchtime, the rumors had spread far beyond the trauma floor. Oliver walked into the employee cafeteria carrying his tray. The room buzzed with conversations. He searched for an empty table. Oliver! A cheerful voice called from across the room. It was Emily, one of the pediatric nurses he'd met during orientation. We saved you a seat. Oliver joined Emily and 2 other staff members. So, Emily said with a grin, tell us. Tell you what? What kind of magic spell did you use on Dr. Carter? Oliver sighed dramatically. Not you too. Everyone laughed. I'm serious, another nurse said. I've worked here 5 years. I've worked here 7, Emily added. And yesterday was the first time I've ever seen him smile at someone like that. Oliver shook his head. I honestly don't know. Emily narrowed her eyes playfully. You sure? Positive. Just then, the cafeteria became noticeably quieter. Oliver looked toward the entrance. Mason had walked in. He picked up a salad and a bottle of water before scanning the room for an empty seat. Every table seemed occupied. Without thinking much about it, Oliver lifted a hand. Doctor. Mason looked over. For a brief second, their eyes met. Then, to everyone's surprise, Mason walked directly toward Oliver's table. May I? Oliver nodded. Of course. Emily and the others exchanged stunned glances but politely made room. The conversation became strangely awkward. Nobody seemed to know what to say. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Busy morning? Mason nodded. It usually is. Another nurse asked about a patient. Mason answered politely. He wasn't rude. He wasn't unfriendly. He simply spoke when there was something worth saying. Oliver noticed something interesting. Whenever someone else spoke to Mason, his replies were short and professional. But whenever Oliver asked a question, Mason actually looked at him, listened carefully, answered with genuine attention. It was subtle, almost impossible to notice, unless someone was watching closely. Apparently, everyone was watching. When lunch ended, Mason stood. It was nice having lunch with you. He looked directly at Oliver. I'll see you later. You too. After Mason left, Emily slowly turned toward Oliver. I don't believe what I just witnessed. What? Emily laughed in disbelief. He chose our table. So? He always eats alone. Oliver frowned. Always. Emily nodded. Every single day. Oliver didn't know what to think anymore. The following week passed quickly. Oliver settled into his new job. He learned everyone's names. He memorized department schedules. He became someone the staff relied on. And almost every day, Mason found a reason to stop by his desk. Sometimes it was to ask about paperwork he could have emailed. Sometimes it was to thank Oliver for organizing surgical schedules. Sometimes, he simply asked how Oliver's day was going. Those conversations never lasted more than a minute or two. Yet Oliver found himself looking forward to them. There was something comforting about Mason's quiet presence. He wasn't loud. He didn't flirt. He never crossed professional boundaries. But every conversation felt genuine. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Oliver was sorting medical files when the power briefly flickered. The lights dimmed for a second before emergency generators activated. Several computer systems restarted. Oh no! Oliver stared at his monitor. The scheduling software froze. He clicked several buttons. Nothing happened. This can't be happening. The trauma department's surgery schedule for the next 3 days was on that system. Linda hurried over. What's wrong? The program crashed. Before either of them could figure out what to do, Mason walked into the office. What happened? Linda explained the situation. Mason looked toward Oliver. You saved a backup, didn't you? Oliver nodded immediately. About 10 minutes ago. A hint of relief crossed Mason's face. I thought you might. Linda smiled in surprise. I didn't even know he'd made one. Oliver shrugged. My college professor always said computers fail at the worst possible time. Mason looked at him with unmistakable pride. Smart habit. The IT department restored the files within minutes. What could have been hours of confusion became a minor inconvenience. As everyone returned to work, Linda quietly leaned toward Oliver. You know what impresses me? What? Dr. Carter wasn't worried about the system. He wasn't. She smiled knowingly. He was already confident you'd solve the problem. Oliver watched Mason disappear down the hallway. How could someone who barely knew him trust him that much? That evening, Oliver stayed late to finish paperwork. The hospital had grown unusually quiet. Most departments had already dimmed their lights. As he organized the last stack of files, he heard footsteps approaching. Mason stood in the doorway. You're still here. Oliver smiled. So are you. A surgeon's schedule isn't very predictable.
Eva noticed.
Mason glanced at the clock. You missed dinner. Oliver looked at the time. I didn't even realize. Without another word, Mason reached into the paper bag he was carrying. I ordered 2 sandwiches. Oliver looked surprised. You brought one for me? I had a feeling you'd still be working. For a moment, Oliver didn't know what to say. No one had ever noticed small things like that so quickly. Thank you. Mason gave a quiet nod. Don't thank me. He placed the sandwich on the desk. Just promise me you'll eat before it gets cold. As Mason turned to leave, Oliver noticed a small notebook sticking out of the doctor's lab coat pocket. It slipped slightly as he walked away. For just a second, Oliver caught sight of a page filled with handwritten notes. At the very top of the page, he could have sworn he saw his own name, Oliver. Before he could look again, Mason adjusted his coat, hiding the notebook from view. Oliver's heartbeat quickened. Why would one of the hospital's busiest surgeons be carrying a notebook with his name written inside? Oliver couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. He told himself he had probably imagined it. Doctors carried notebooks everywhere. They were filled with patient reminders, surgery notes, medication lists, and meeting schedules. There was no reason his name would be inside one. Still, the image stayed with him. The following morning, he arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. The trauma department was unusually quiet. Most of the surgeons were still in morning rounds, leaving only a few nurses preparing charts for the day. Oliver had barely logged into his computer when Emily walked over. You've become impossible to surprise. Oliver looked up. What do you mean? You always get here before everyone else now. He smiled. I'm still trying to prove I deserve this job. Emily laughed. I think you've already done that. She lowered her voice. Especially to one person. Oliver sighed. If this is another Dr. Carter conversation, it absolutely is. Before Oliver could respond, Linda hurried into the office. Oliver. Yes. I need you to deliver these surgical consent forms to Dr. Carter's office before 8. Sure. Oliver picked up the folder and walked toward the private offices behind the trauma unit. Most of the doors were open. Mason's wasn't. Oliver knocked gently. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. He checked his watch. Mason was probably still finishing rounds. I'll just leave these on his desk. The office door wasn't locked. Oliver stepped inside. The room was exactly what he expected. Neat, organized, simple. Medical books lined one wall. Family photographs were nowhere to be seen. The desk held only a computer, a coffee mug, and several perfectly arranged patient files. Oliver placed the consent forms neatly beside the keyboard. As he turned to leave, something caught his attention. A framed photograph sitting on a bookshelf. It wasn't facing the room. It faced Mason's chair, almost as if only Mason was meant to see it. Curious, Oliver stepped closer. The picture showed a crowded community health fair from nearly 10 years earlier. Dozens of volunteers smiled at the camera. Children held balloons. Medical students wore matching t-shirts. Oliver frowned. Why did this picture feel familiar? He leaned closer. His heart skipped. Near the front of the group, a 17-year-old boy wearing a volunteer badge stood beside an information booth. Messy brown hair. The same smile. It was him. A younger Oliver. What? His voice barely escaped his lips. He didn't remember taking this picture. More importantly, why did Dr. Mason Carter have it? Before Oliver could think any further, footsteps echoed outside the office. He quickly stepped away from the shelf just as Mason entered. Their eyes met. For the first time since they'd met, Mason looked completely caught off guard. You found the forms. I did. Silence filled the room. Oliver glanced toward the photograph. I have a question. Mason followed his gaze. He immediately understood. His shoulders relaxed. So, Oliver spoke softly. We have met before. Mason closed the office door behind him. Yes. You told me we hadn't. I wasn't ready. Oliver stared at him. Ready for what? Mason took a slow breath. For this conversation. He pulled out one of the chairs. Would you sit down? Oliver nodded. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Mason looked at the photograph. 10 years ago, I was a first-year medical student. Oliver listened quietly. I almost quit. His words were calm, but there was pain beneath them. My father had passed away only a few months earlier. Oliver's expression softened. I was exhausted. I stopped sleeping. I convinced myself I wasn't good enough to become a doctor. He smiled sadly. One morning, during that community health fair, his eyes returned to Oliver. Everything went wrong. Oliver searched his memory. I don't remember. I know. Mason nodded. You wouldn't. He continued. I was giving free blood pressure screenings. The equipment failed. I accidentally entered incorrect numbers on several forms. My supervising physician corrected me in front of everyone. Oliver could almost picture it. There were families everywhere. Children. Other students. I'd never been so embarrassed. Mason laughed quietly. I remember thinking, maybe everyone is right. Maybe I don't belong here. Oliver remained silent. Then Mason looked directly into his eyes. Everyone else walked away. You didn't. Oliver frowned. What did I do? You walked over with 2 cups of hot chocolate. Oliver blinked. Slowly, a memory began returning. Cold autumn morning. White tents. Community volunteers. Someone sitting alone behind the medical booth. I asked if you wanted one. Mason smiled. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know what had happened. You simply noticed someone sitting alone. Oliver remembered. Barely. I said, kindness matters. Oliver felt his throat tighten. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. Mason smiled. I never expected to see you again. So when Linda introduced you last week, he laughed softly. I honestly forgot how to breathe. Oliver finally understood. The smile. Mason nodded. I couldn't stop it. You looked exactly the same. I knew immediately. Oliver laughed through watery eyes. And I had absolutely no idea who you were. I know. Did that disappoint you? For about 5 seconds. Mason admitted with a smile. Then I realized something. What? I'd been given a second chance. Oliver looked confused. A second chance? To actually know you. Before Oliver could answer, someone knocked gently on the office door. Doctor. A nurse stepped inside. I'm sorry to interrupt. The board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Mason nodded. I'll be there. The nurse smiled politely and left. The room became quiet again. Oliver carefully placed the photograph back on the shelf. I should get back to work. Mason didn't stop him. But just before Oliver reached the door, Oliver, he turned around. Thank you. Oliver smiled warmly. For what? For saving a young medical student who didn't believe in himself. Oliver shook his head. I didn't save anyone. You did. Mason's voice carried absolute certainty. You just never knew it. The rest of the day passed differently. Not because anything around Oliver had changed. Because now, everything finally made sense. Every smile, every conversation, every thoughtful question, every lunch invitation. None of it had been random. None of it had been coincidence. For 10 years, Dr. Mason Carter had carried one small act of kindness in his heart. That evening, Oliver was organizing discharge paperwork when Linda approached his desk. You look happy. I had an interesting conversation today. With Dr. Carter? Oliver smiled. Yes. Linda studied him for a moment before laughing. I knew there had to be a story. There is. Are you going to tell me? Oliver looked toward Mason's office, where the light was still on despite the late hour. Not yet. Linda nodded knowingly. Whatever it is. I haven't seen Dr. Carter this peaceful in years. Oliver followed her gaze. Through the office window, he saw Mason reviewing patient charts. For the first time, the hospital's most serious doctor wasn't wearing his usual guarded expression. He was smiling quietly to himself. And somehow, Oliver had a feeling their story was only just beginning. The conversation in Mason's office changed everything. Not overnight. Not in some dramatic, movie-like way. It changed the quiet moments. The conversations that lasted a little longer. The smiles that appeared a little more often. For the first time in years, people around the hospital noticed Dr. Mason Carter laughing. Not loudly, just enough to remind everyone that beneath the calm surgeon was an ordinary man who had finally lowered his guard. Oliver noticed it most during the small moments. Mason would leave a fresh cup of coffee on his desk before early meetings. If Oliver skipped lunch, another sandwich somehow appeared beside his keyboard. When Oliver stayed late, Mason always seemed to finish charting at the exact same time. Neither of them mentioned it. Neither of them had to. One Friday afternoon, Emily leaned against Oliver's desk with folded arms. I'm officially giving up. Oliver looked up from his computer. Giving up on what? Trying to convince myself that Dr. Carter treats everyone the same. Oliver laughed. He doesn't. She pointed toward the hallway. Watch. And in turn hurried over to Mason with several patient files. Mason thanked him politely and returned to work. A few seconds later, Oliver stepped into the hallway carrying scheduling paperwork. The moment Mason noticed him, his entire expression softened. Good morning, Oliver. Morning. Did you remember to eat breakfast today? Oliver smiled. I did. Good. Emily looked between them before shaking her head dramatically. There it is. Oliver laughed. What? That face. What face? The one he only has when you're around. Oliver felt warmth rise to his cheeks. I think you're imagining things. I'm definitely not. Before Oliver could answer, Linda called from across the department. Oliver, conference room 3. He excused himself and walked away. Emily remained where she was, watching Mason. The surgeon noticed her curious expression. What is it? Emily smiled knowingly. You deserve to be happy, doctor. For a brief moment Mason seemed surprised. Then he simply answered, I know. Over the next several weeks, Oliver and Mason slowly became part of each other's daily routines. They weren't rushing anything. Some evenings they walked to the parking garage together. Other days they shared coffee between surgeries. Sometimes they sat in the hospital garden during lunch without saying much at all. Surprisingly, the silence never felt uncomfortable. Felt peaceful. One cool autumn evening, Oliver found Mason sitting alone on a bench outside the hospital after his shift. The city lights reflected across the nearby lake. Mind if I join you? Oliver asked. I was hoping you would. Oliver sat beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Oliver broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Always. You kept that photograph for 10 years. Yes. You never tried to find me? Mason smiled gently. I thought about it. So why didn't you? Because kindness isn't a debt. Oliver looked at him. You gave me hope without expecting anything back. I didn't want to take that beautiful memory and turn it into an obligation. I've been thinking about that day too. The health fair. Oliver nodded. I barely remembered it until you showed me the picture. He smiled softly. My mom always used to tell me something. What was that? Be kind to people because you'll never know what battle they're fighting. Mason looked down for a second. She was right. I guess she was. Another comfortable silence settled between them. Then Mason looked toward the hospital entrance. Would you have recognized me if things had been different? Oliver laughed. The nervous medical student from 10 years ago? Yes. I honestly don't know. Mason chuckled. I probably wouldn't have recognized myself either. Both of them laughed. It was the easiest conversation they'd ever shared. A month later, Seattle General announced its annual charity gala. Every department would attend to raise money for children's emergency care. The entire hospital buzzed with excitement. Emily immediately cornered Oliver. So, you are going. I have to. She smiled mischievously. Good. Why are you smiling like that? No reason. Oliver narrowed his eyes. I don't believe you. You'll see. The evening of the gala arrived. The ballroom overlooking Elliott Bay glowed with warm lights. Doctors, nurses, administrators, and volunteers filled the room wearing elegant suits and dresses. Oliver adjusted the sleeves of his navy suit while looking around. You clean up nicely. He turned. Mason stood behind him wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. For a second, Oliver forgot how to speak. You look. Mason smiled. I'll accept old. Oliver laughed. I was going to say incredible. A faint blush appeared across Mason's face. Thank you. Throughout the evening they spoke with coworkers, donors, and hospital board members. Several people quietly noticed how naturally they stayed beside each other. Not because they were trying to, because that's simply where they wanted to be. Later that night, the hospital director stepped onto the stage. I'd like to recognize one physician whose dedication has inspired all of us. Applause filled the room. Dr. Mason Carter. Mason looked genuinely uncomfortable as everyone clapped. He walked to the stage. After accepting the award, he adjusted the microphone. I appreciate this honor. His voice remained calm. But I learned something many years ago. The room became quiet. Medicine isn't only about saving lives. It's about reminding people they're not alone. Oliver looked up. Mason's eyes found him across the ballroom. There was a young volunteer who once offered a stranger a cup of hot chocolate and a few simple words. Oliver immediately recognized the story. He probably forgot that moment. But the stranger never did. The audience listened in complete silence. That single act of kindness shaped the doctor I became. Oliver felt tears forming. Mason stepped down from the stage. Instead of returning to his table, he walked directly toward Oliver. The room watched curiously. Stopping in front of him, Mason smiled. You spent 10 years without knowing what you meant to me. Oliver's voice trembled. And you spent 10 years remembering someone who had forgotten. I never needed you to remember. I only hoped life had been kind to you. Oliver's eyes filled with emotion. It has been. He smiled. It brought me here. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Oliver quietly asked, What happens now? Mason answered honestly, I'd like to take you to dinner. Oliver laughed through happy tears. As a thank you? Mason shook his head.
No.
As the beginning of something neither of us has to imagine anymore. Oliver's smile grew wider. I'd like that. Very gently, without rushing, Mason reached for Oliver's hand. Oliver intertwined their fingers. Several nearby coworkers noticed. Emily smiled knowingly. Linda wiped away a small tear. Even the hospital director quietly smiled before turning away to give them their privacy. Later that evening, after the gala ended, Oliver and Mason walked outside together. Seattle's waterfront shimmered beneath the night sky. A cool breeze drifted across the bay. I still can't believe all of this started with a cup of hot chocolate, Oliver said. Mason laughed. It wasn't the hot chocolate. What was it then? You saw someone everyone else walked past. Oliver looked at him. I think anyone would have done the same. Mason gently shook his head. They didn't. They continued walking until they reached the quiet overlook beside the water. The city lights reflected across the waves. Mason turned toward Oliver. Can I tell you one more secret? Oliver smiled. I think we're past keeping secrets. The first day you walked into the hospital, I was terrified. Oliver looked surprised. You?
Eva faced impossible surgeries.
The kind that couldn't be forced. Months later, Seattle General still whispered about the day the hospital's most serious doctor smiled at a new employee. Most people believed it was the beginning of their story. Only Oliver and Mason knew the truth. Their story had begun 10 years earlier with a forgotten cup of hot chocolate, a few simple words of kindness, and a moment that proved even the smallest act of compassion can quietly change a life forever. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more emotional, slow-burn love stories every week. Tell me in the comments, do you believe one small act of kindness can change someone's life forever? And remember, sometimes the people who seem the coldest are simply waiting for the right person to make them smile. See you in the next story.